So you might be a little confused. Why do I have over a billion EMC? Why do I have an unbreakable pickaxe? Why am I still in chapter 1 of this bitch-ass mod pack? Well, you see here, Meatballcraft is a little different from your typical expert pack. Now, instead of explaining how it's different, I'm just going to show you. Starting from day 1. Before that though, a little history. Feel free to skip ahead. I'll put a chapter in the video playlist thing if you want to get right into the plot. So anyway, basically, I've been wanting to play Meatballcraft for around 2 years now, but between the iceberg video and Super Symmetry, I've never had the time. In fact, I did attempt to play Meatballcraft way back in 2022, but it was a lot less complete than it is now, and I kind of got lost in the sauce. Regardless, now that I've cleared my plate, it's time to load it with some meatballs. With any mod pack of this size, the natural first step is to compress a library's worth of books into an Akashic Tome. Thankfully, the developers have been generous and provided one free of charge. With my inventory sorted, it was time to do the typical chores. Punching trees, making a pickaxe, you get the idea. After playing pure GregTech mod packs for the past 2 years, the next step was a breath of fresh air. The construction of a T-Con smeltery. Assuming you've seen anything modded Minecraft before, you probably know what that is. But if you don't, it's basically a really fancy furnace that does a lot of extra stuff. Now that I have a smeltery though, I need ores for it. Meatballcraft is not a normal mod pack. This is naturally due to multiple factors, but I really think the one at the heart of the problem is its flagship mod, Advent of Ascension. Besides adding more than 10 dimensions, it adds a bunch of very balanced tools. One of them is the Shikaxe. A combination of a shovel, hoe, axe, and pickaxe has a bunch of cool features like ignoring all mining level requirements and having infinite durability. All for the cost of 9 ingots of an ore more common than diamond. This was made even easier with the ore doubling capabilities of the T-Con smeltery. With all mining problems solved, it was time to progress. Naturally, my first thought was the Nether, so I mined some obsidian, and it's gated. Behind what, you may ask? The Alien Material Manual, which requires some more progression than just a fancy pickaxe. After realizing this, I decided to take a stroll and had a short encounter with the Crimson Cult, netting me some void metal, which is pretty cool considering I haven't even begun Thaumcraft yet. I was kind of lost at this point, so I just ended up following the quests, which required me to gather a ton of ink sacs. As I love to blindly follow instructions, I spent the next few hours killing squids, as I failed to find the fabled prismarine structures that contained the ink sac motherlode. Getting back on track, I thought it was high time to get my hands on the Alien Material Manual, as access to the Nether would be essential for my further ambitions. The first priority was making a blast furnace from Immersive Engineering, as a key ingredient in the manual would be shadow steel, which needed the furnace to be produced. After gathering some coal coke for fuel, I realized that the furnace requires blaze powder and nether bricks to craft, which is kind of a problem. Thankfully, there isn't a catch-22 here, as certain structures have blast furnace bricks available for harvest. Sadly, these structures aren't very common. In fact, during my journeys to find them, I ended up temporarily trapped in a pocket dimension imitation of the Nether, provided courtesy of dimensional doors. More regrettably, the pocket dimension did not contain blaze powder, so I would have to continue my several-hour search for blast furnace bricks. Eventually though, I figured out there's another structure that contains the bricks, and that structure just so happens to be next to my world spawn, so that made things easier. After mourning the severe time loss that was the search for blast bricks, I cooked up some nice shadow steel and crafted the Alien Material Manual, which enabled new crafting recipes and allowed me to travel into the Nether. Apparently it also made monsters more difficult, but I'm just gonna ignore that. Alright, remember those ink sacs from earlier? Apparently the reason why the book wanted me to gather those was in order to craft the black iron required to make the basic crafting table. What is the basic crafting table? A normal crafting table that's black and only has certain recipes. Why is it useful? Because it allows me to craft the advanced crafting table. I think it is important to mention here that in the background of all this crafting, I was busy domesticating chickens that laid emeralds as a side gig, which will become important later. Anyway, once I did craft the basic crafting table though, I decided to take a short trip to the newly unlocked Nether for the sake of material acquisition. Conveniently, a nice Nether fortress was nearby that also happened to host some sort of dungeon that contained a divine Shikaxe. This is like the other Shikaxe I have, but not only does it mine faster, it has the potential to be super enchanted, which is something I'll explain later. Once I returned from my trip in hell, I crafted the advanced crafting table, as it only really required some gold and iron. The advanced crafting table is very similar to the basic crafting table, with the exception that it uses a 5x5 crafting grid. My obtaining of the advanced crafting table and access to the nether allows me to craft what is arguably the most powerful item in modded Minecraft. Allow me to introduce you to Project E. Once known as Equivalent Exchange, this mod gives most items in the game an EMC value, which determines what is essentially its exchange rate. With the power of the transmutation table, all mining becomes trivial and I'll have access to near infinite building resources. All I needed was some glowstone, redstone, and mithril. Thankfully, mithril is not really that hard to get, being available in a structure that generates in the nether. With some retrieved, blam, I got the transmutation table. Sadly, I had no idea where to go from here and decided that maybe upgrading my pickaxe could be a good next step. With the game being, Minecraft and all. The Direpick is a super enchanted version of the Divine Shikaxe, apparently being infused by the power of eldritch deities. Confused? So am I. Super enchanting is the process of using an item along with a bunch of other relatively expensive or hard to obtain resources in order to upgrade it into its super enchanted version, which is the same item but it usually has some broken enchantment on it. In this case, the Direpick is enchanted with efficiency 20, which is faster than any pickaxe has the right to be, and all it required was 8 eldritch sigils from around the world. I am remarkably bad at exploration, so when I say it took another day to locate all 8 sigils, I'm not kidding. During the search, I also found the dude I got my skin from, which is pretty cool, although it looks like they updated him. I also had decided to craft the slime boots and slime sling, as simply walking around was taking way too long. Eventually, though, I managed to locate each symbol inside of a structure and retrieve it, with a little help from the Meatballcraft Discord server. Thankfully, after all this shit was said and done, the pickaxe did not disappoint and proceeded to annihilate anything and everything it touched. With Direpick in hand, it was time to progress. Specifically, I planned to obtain the Energy Collector Mark I, which required some pretty exotic resources like Shadow and Ascended Gems. Like always though, Meatballcraft had some strange methods of obtaining the resources available. After failing to gather a significant amount of Shadow Gems from fighting shadow creatures in the Darklands, I decided to raid a battle tower. While I initially thought this would be a waste of time, I looted a piece of paper that allowed me to summon shadow creatures and kill them for shadow gems, so that all worked out well. As for the Ascended Gems, they just needed to be mined, which was no problem for an efficiency 20 pickaxe. Then, I got distracted. You see, I didn't have a place to actually put a power flower made from the energy collector yet, so I wanted to delve into Thaumcraft a little to get some decorative blocks. This diversion was sort of a waste of time, as while I did gather the crystals and make a lot of basic blocks required for the mod, research tables were gated past the next stage, so there was no way I was making any Thaumcraft progress in this episode. At this point, I kinda just surrendered and made the energy collector, although I still didn't place it. Remember those emerald chickens from earlier? Well, it turns out emeralds happen to have a fuck ton of EMC, which would come in handy for making things like the dark matter relay and energy condenser. Sadly, these chickens make emeralds at a miserably slow pace, so in the meantime I decided to begin a side quest. Little did I know, this would become my main focus for pretty much the rest of the chapter. First off, I needed a sentient meatball, which could be obtained from this random zombie boss I could summon with some moss. Then I needed to do some meatball processing in order to produce some cosmic meatballs. Yeah, like the ones from Avaridia. This meatball processing involved crushing and fusing meatballs, and of course, these processes would require power. As I was in the early game and didn't feel like using fuel, I settled on a thermoelectric generator to make power. Using the heat differential between some yellorium blocks and ice I had gathered from a dragon den, the generator makes a decent amount of power, which I harnessed after making some leadstone flux ducts. To make use of the power, I crafted 2 induction smelters. Looking back on it, I don't actually know why I crafted 2, but I did. I then retreated to the underground to retrieve some infinity dust, Ender IO's special crafting component and an ingredient in our meatballs. Now all I needed was a sag mill from Ender IO in order to crush up some pork and beef. The thing is, the sag mill needed crushed diamonds in order to be crafted, which is rather unfortunate as I had no method of crushing the diamonds without it. Again though, there's a simple way around these bicycle problems. Basically all I needed to do was spin this lever to crush the diamonds manually. With a sag mill crafted, I could crush up my meat, use the induction smelter to combine it into balls, combine it with some more meat to make an even bigger meatball, then use some grains of infinity and flux dust made by smashing redstone against obsidian and bedrock to finally craft the cosmic meatballs. With the sentient meatball from earlier, some copper coins, and the cosmic meatballs, I can make some digital organic currency to be traded with the deep trader in exchange for Eden dust, the key ingredient in the next goal of this side quest. Regrettably, I didn't have enough sentient meatballs though, and I had to engage in some more combat with the zombie guy. Once I had put him to rest a few more times, I obtained the 4 pieces of Eden dust I needed for the unusually heavy bone, which when used summoned a bone creature with 1,000 health. After a very slow battle I killed it, granting me a hard bone, which was completely useless at the moment, namely because I didn't have bees yet. Forestry is a lot of things. A mod that adds an in-game mail system, a mod that adds new trees, and a mod that takes you right back to your high school biology class. Forestry bee breeding is a very in-depth process that has quite a bit of factors to it. Factors that I completely ignore as I try to rush for my next goal, the noble bee. A crossbreed of common and cultivated bees, the first step in obtaining it was gathering bees from around the world. After setting up some hives for the bees to live in, I put a forest and meadows bee into it, which will eventually have them breed. Now, I could re-explain Punnett squares for those interested, but honestly they aren't too important for what I'm doing right now, especially considering this pack is Gendistry. Gendistry single-handedly destroys all balance forestry has. Instead of having to breed bees in hives over time, you could basically just shove them into a relatively cheap machine and pick their output. After crafting said machine, I hooked it to my power supply and proceeded to do nothing with it because I needed a fluid called mutagen, whose production collapsed my power grid. At this point, I rearranged my priorities. The side quest was becoming a little too taxing on my infrastructure, so I took a step back and tried to improve it. First, I placed my energy collector Mark 1. It doesn't really do anything right now, but it will become important later. Then I killed a dragon and gathered some blaze rods. You may be thinking to yourself, that was random. But you see, there's a method to the madness here. Meatballcraft has one net positive EMC loop. That is a process by which you can produce extra EMC from a crafting recipe. And it goes as such. 4 blaze rods and a dragon heart make a diamond without consuming the dragon heart. Decaying the diamond into EMC nets enough to make 4 blaze rods, but also leaves a little extra. Recycle those blaze rods back into a diamond, decay the diamond into EMC, and you'll have a little more extra. Eventually the amount of excess EMC can start making more blaze rods, and eventually you have an endless supply of diamonds. My infrastructure is not quite there yet though. First off, I need to craft an energy condenser Mark II to process the diamonds back into blaze rods. This requires blocks of red matter, which is not currently feasible. To solve the problem, I rapidly expand my emerald chicken farm to produce more EMC rich emeralds. I also retrieve another shadow gem to make a dark matter collector Mark I, which is completely irrelevant to the whole EMC loop thing and is part of my next project while I wait for my chickens to lay millions of EMC worth of emeralds. So remember I was talking about improving infrastructure? Like any modded playthrough, the core infrastructure of a base is its energy production, and one thermoelectric generator was not cutting it. Thankfully, I had a solution. Magmatic dynamos consumed lava to make energy, and magma crucibles melt blocks into lava. Often the problem with making energy generation like this is that the lava generation consumes more energy than the generators can make with the lava it produces. But thankfully that would not be a problem if I melted down netherrack. Sadly, infinite sources of netherrack aren't as easy to come by as infinite supplies of cobblestone. I mean, it's not like I have a block that passively gains smallest amount of EMC over time, and another block that can transfer that energy into an energy condenser to make the EMC cheap netherrack. Oh wait, this setup is what is called a power flower. An energy collector slowly makes energy passively. A dark matter block acts as a buffer for an energy condenser Mark I, which will produce a material, in this case netherrack. As you can see from all this background footage, I managed to set up a pretty big magma loop engine. This mitigated the power crisis, but I have much bigger plans for energy production next episode. Continuing my infrastructure activities, I expanded both my smeltery and built a habitat former for my bees. You see, my base is in a relatively cold biome that most bees don't really like to live in. In order to alleviate this, the habitat former warms up the area and makes it habitable for my bees. Once I set it up, I expanded my emerald chicken farm as the EMC really wasn't flowing nearly as fast as I wanted it to. right after I built an industrial apiary in order to attempt to speed up the process of obtaining a noble bee. This failed miserably as the industrial apiary ignored the habitat former's warmth. Coming out of this failure, I decided the best course of action was to drastically improve my emerald production. So I did that. Nothing like what a bit of EMC and some chickens can do. In fact, I plan to build this farm much bigger, but after letting it idle for like an hour, it produced enough EMC I could finally make this energy condenser Mark II for the Dragonheart loop. My actual footage for the construction of the loop corrupted after my dumbass pressed F11 while ending the recording, but that doesn't matter. What does matter is, it was too slow for my liking. Simple item conduits from Ender.io were not going to work, so I decided to make test locators, the fastest item transportation available. These test locators required a drop from what is quite possibly the most annoying and mob to farm ever, and after several hours of war with them, I managed to retrieve all the ingredients and install them into my system. And let me just say, it was really fucking fast. I also installed a crafter into the system to compress excess diamonds into blocks for convenience's sake. Oh yeah, I also got this enchantment on my pickaxe which allows me to mine the 3x3 area because it definitely wasn't already broken enough as is. With infinite EMC, the pickaxe capable of dismantling the entire world, and basically everything else I could get within the first chapter in hand, it was time to make the final push to get the noble bee and the dripping comb it produced. I'm not going to go into detail because it was kinda boring, but there was a lot of breeding for gene selection, waiting, and a short trip to the nether to get a drop of evil, which will become important next episode. Anyway, I eventually obtained the final dripping combs required to make the skeletal Callstone. So I set myself out to a mountain, used it, and immediately died to a bone guy. Thankfully he was gone when I returned, so I just snatched up the spring barter bee and ran. That side quest finally completed. All I had to do was a little microcrafting, and I had the elite crafting table, just sending me to chapter 2. Thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun playing this pack, and I know it's only going to get better from here. I hope you enjoyed the video. It ended up being a lot more work than expected. I think that's because unlike Sussy, where you only have like 5 objectives that take forever to get, there's a million smaller ones. I don't know. See you next time.